This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the ZMan Cliffs. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day, wherever you're listening from, and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. This week is episode number 587, and we welcome Nir Bashan to talk to us today. We're going to talk about harnessing the power of creativity to help improve profitability, increase sales, and give meaning to your work. Looking forward to a great show. We've done these business shows from time to time to try and help people with their business planning and so on. Looking forward to an interesting one today, a little different take on it. So hang in there, and we'll be right back. Before we go, let's thank our sponsors. First is our newest sponsor, the American Industrial Hygiene Association. Learn more at AIAJ.org.
IAQ Radio Association sponsors are the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists. Learn more at acgih.org. The Cleaning Industry Research Institute. Learn more at ciriscience.org. The Indoor Air Quality Association. Learn more at iaqa.org. And the Restoration Industry Association. Learn more at restorationindustry.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are AEML Laboratories. Learn more at aemlinc.com. Particles Plus. Learn more at particlesplus.com. And Healthy Indoors Magazine. Subscriptions available at healthyindoors.com.
Okay, so this week's guest is Nir Bashan. He's a world-renowned creativity expert. Taught thousands of leaders and individuals around the globe how to harness the power of creativity to improve profitability, increase sales, and ultimately create a more meaning in their work. Nir has spent the last 2 decades working on a formula to codify creativity. He's the founder and CEO of the Creator Mindset, a company that conducts workshops, consulting, coaching, and keynote speeches at conferences and corporate events. And his clients include AT&T, Microsoft, Ace Hardware, the NFL Networks, Suzuki, JetBlue, and he lives, I can't say that one. All right. So anyway, I don't want to give away the trivia question. Nir, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Great to have you here. Little out of sync today because my co-host is out, but let's talk a little bit about creativity, I guess. I want to start with, I always like to get the definitions down. How do you define creativity?
You know, it's a really good question. I think that, overall, creativity is kind of that spark. It's that missing spark of innovation, of problem solving that I keep seeing in businesses all over the world. Really, it's something that's not taught in schools, right? We're sort of taught, Joe, how to analyze really well through spreadsheets and different types of logic. Yet we kind of have a whole half of our mind that's dedicated to solving problems creatively that we're not using. And so I think that creativity, especially in this context, is really about coming up with problem solving for businesses, especially in your organization and in your sort of orbit that maybe haven't been thought about before or haven't been executed before because of the lack of understanding of that part of our potential. That's kind of how I define creativity.
How did you get so enamored by and into learning about and teaching about creativity?
It's a really good question. Yes, sir. So I had kind of a endless job after endless job. I graduated high school and then started refinishing furniture. And worked at a call center and did, a bunch of jobs that went nowhere. I think like most of us. And at a certain point, no matter what I did, from manufacturing, and I worked in, fast food restaurants, I saw that there's a commonality in success, where certain people do really well and others don't do really well. And there's a through line there, in terms of success. And for me, it's always been, the people that are the most creative tend to do the best. They tend to be able to solve problems. They tend to be able to sort of move forward and figure things out and come up with fresh and cool and innovative new ideas. And I thought, great, that's what I want to do. There's got to be a book, right, Joe? There's got to be some manual, or a website, or a podcast. There's got to be something online or whatnot that I can go read the thing, learn what they're doing, and just kind of capture that sense of creativity. And I found that there's none of it. And then I started kind of climbing in my career, eventually opening my own companies, running companies for other people. And I still found the same problem. Nobody's teaching anybody how to be creative. I've had the good fortune of meeting some very, very, very creative people, and I'd ask them, hey, can you give me some tips? I want to be creative. This is awesome. You guys know how to solve problems like nobody else, and this is really cool. How do you do it? And I hit a wall, right? They're like, wow, that's my IP. We don't, I can show you a couple things, but that's kind of who I am. And, the more I started kind of seeing this out there, the more I said, what, wait a second, I've been paying attention to this for 20 years. I ought to sort of write this stuff down and, kind of connect the dots and come up with a master plan to give to somebody, so that they can be creative too. And I did that. It's a book that's coming out in August of this year, August 4th. It's called The Creator Mindset. It's on Amazon, and it'll be in bookstores. They're already translating it into 2 languages, which is really cool for a first-time author. I mean, I'm a business person, primarily, a writer, kind of a distant second. And I'm very excited about it.
I would think within psychology, you would think that they had kind of looked at that whole idea of creativity and the 2 sides of the mind and so on. Were you able to find anything in the psychology literature?
So I looked in that realm, social psychology, behavioral psychology, especially, Joe. And gosh, I found a lot of good stuff, but what I really found was academic stuff. Hey, we did a study, and I love studies, where we had a bunch of, college freshmen. We gave them $5 to participate, and they ended up, becoming more creative when we put a light bulb in the room, or, we changed the color of the room to a pink or a certain kind of color that would increase creativity. It's wonderful, and I love that kind of stuff. But I think there's a little bit of a gap between a academic approach to creativity and a real world. We got kind of a crappy cash flow situation like now. What do we do now to remedy the problem? I didn't find those types of business solutions in the academic literature. I found some amazing stuff, but nothing that you and I, or people in my orbit, and people in the business community can say, this is what I want to enact now, as an execution, for lack of a better word, of creativity.
I think I have a good feel for why creativity is so important now, especially with COVID-19 and the problems people are going through with their businesses. But I wonder if you could maybe comment on that a little bit. Why now? Why is it so important right now? And how can we use this creativity to help kind of pull our businesses out of the doldrums?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think now more than ever we need a different way to look at things, and we need to have a sort of sense of what the world is and what we are trying to accomplish. So, one of the things that I like to do when I'm out consulting or whatnot is look at somebody's business and see what it is that we can be doing more creatively, especially now. I don't know, maybe somebody did, but nobody really predicted this thing, right? It kind of came out of nowhere, for lack of a better term. And it's really changed the dynamic, the playing field of what's going on in business today. And you see kind of a chasm, two sort of sections, right? Joe, and I'm sure you see this in your business too. You see, some people who are embracing creativity and coming up with different implementations of their business, and you see people kind of shutting their doors and saying, I don't know, let the government sort it out. Let them write me a check. I'll open up when they're sort of back. On one side, on the creative side, you see, I don't know, restaurants, right? You see them sort of offering a meal to go, but they're including some produce, 2 heads of lettuce, 4 tomatoes, so on and so forth. And in that package, you get your meal, but you're getting a little extra, and that kind of creative. Here in where I am, not to ruin the trivia question, we're starting to see retail clothes stores, sell clothes, kind of, have a little table in the front, and they're bringing the POS machine and they're interacting with customers with a safe distance, giving that customer 3 of the same article of clothing so that they can go home and try it and see if they like it. Again, this is a creative implementation. It's taking your business and saying, I have a brick and mortar operation. How do I look at what I'm doing and become a little bit more creative, and coming up with a bunch of solutions? Or it's looking at the business, during COVID and just kind of throwing your hands up and saying, you know what, it's a tough time, and I give up. The main difference is mentality. Joe, when you have the mentality of a creator, of somebody who's interested in solving problems with creativity, you tend to have options that open up for you. You tend to have a way and a process and an understanding that not only will things get better, but that you have a hand in it getting better. When you sort of throw your hands up, you maybe take on a mentality a little bit that is, kind of accepting your situation and calling it a day. I don't think that there's any problem that has ever been generated by mankind that cannot be resolved through the use of creativity. I honestly think it's the only thing that everybody has, that we're all born with, essentially, that we kind of have let go. It's amazing. It's like, it's one thing that every man and woman on earth has a God-given ability to use creativity to solve problems. And we kind of did it when we were young, right? We went to art class, or we doodled, or we did something like that. But as we grew older, I feel, Joe, we kind of threw it away, right? Don't you think? I mean, all those creative things that we were doing as kids, we don't do anymore. And what suffers? I think our business suffers, first of all. Our life suffers, and we're unable to kind of come up with these great lightning bolt sort of ideas that help us move forward in our business. And COVID is an essential time to see that happening. But what do we see, Joe? We see, me telling you 2 exceptions that I've seen in my hometown here. We don't have a conversation about, how many people got it right. We have a conversation about the one or two, maybe a couple also that have gotten it right. Instead, what I'd like to do is change the discourse in the U.S. And around the world to some degree, so that these stories of the guy coming up with a creative idea to move his business forward is not the exception, but it's the norm.
Absolutely. I'm wondering, when you mentioned that we kind of lose creativity over time, and I've looked at that a little myself, actually. I think a lot of it's because we're beaten down. When children are very creative, sometimes that's not as encouraged as it could be. It's kind of like it's not following the path, of studying this and studying that and going forward. And I don't know, did you see any of that in your research, that we're not really embracing creativity in youth?
Yeah, so it's absolutely right. What I have been seeing, and I've been really lucky, when we sort of put out the feelers for different researchers and academics to help. I mean, it's a mass market book, right? It's not a university sort of book. It's a book for business people to be able to read, on a hopefully 5-hour flight when we get back to flying and all that stuff. Kind of a primer on how to do stuff now to be more creative. And what we found in the research is that children are inherently more creative because they're not afraid of failure. And Joe, the tipping point becomes the sense of failure. I think in adults, what we're seeing is that we're way too failure adverse. We don't want to make mistakes. We don't want to get it wrong. We want to get it right every time. And what ends up happening by trying to get it right all the time is that, well, not only is it impossible, and not only does it provide untold amounts of stress and anxiety for people, especially business owners, especially employees who are trying to sort of, rise up to the top. It creates a scenario where nobody wants to take a risk anymore because we're afraid of what might happen. And when we're children, the research has shown, we had an amazing child psychology expert, Dr. Beth Long from one of the premier children's hospitals, contribute to the book. And she's found that, in some of the research that children, are, there's less at stake for getting it wrong. And therefore, they've created themselves more and more creativity, and therein by coming up with different options to help sort of solve problems. It really is an incredible thing. And as we get older, we're encouraged to do it less. So I found some research around schooling, and I started to ask questions. Well, why are we in school the way that they are now? There's a teacher in the front of the room, and there's 30 people on the other side. I've actually used some of this logic for conferences too. But anyway, there's a teacher on one side, there's 30 kids on the other. And we've seen it as early as, kindergarten, first grade. The teacher will go and ask questions, and sort of say, hey, well, what, when was, the Declaration, the Magna Carta, what was the date, or whatever the coursework is. And, you have students that will want to answer that absolutely. They want to get the right answer. We're not really encouraging people to be creative about how they look at a problem and sort of kind of attack it from different angles to allow creativity. So I think what happens is, Joe, our schools are kind of discouraging creativity, and we come through the system. We're in high school. We know that the teacher ain't looking for, what we think or whatnot, or some creative implementation. They're looking for you to execute and complete the project. More so in college as well. And when we get out in the real world, someone hires us, or maybe we're lucky enough to start our own business from the get-go, right out of high school or whatnot, or even earlier. And we're sort of sprung into an environment where you got to get it right every time. You got to get it right. And when we got to get it right, we put too much pressure on ourselves. And it takes away from an ability to be creative.
I think that fear of failure is, I wasn't expecting you to say that, but I think that really rings true to me, that people are obviously very afraid of failure. Excuse me. And when they want to try something new with their business, they feel like if it doesn't succeed, that they're a failure, and I think that stops them from doing that. But I'm wondering, how do you determine, when you want to try and implement something new in your business, how do you know when it's not going to work and it's time to move on to the next new thing, or do you keep going at it time after time until it actually works? What do you recommend for people there?
Yeah. So what I recommend is, I think that the answer to your question lies in the root of what it is that we do. Okay. So let's say we're in the disaster restoration business, right? I got, either a franchise or on my own sort of team. I got a call, a customer's house or business has been flooded. Okay. So I show up, and what do? I kind of go through my standard operating protocol. I look around, I get the blowers out, right? I go, gotta cut the drywall up about 1.5 feet, and, got to dry out this room, lower the humidity, do all the sort of standard operating practices, which are brilliant, right? Because they've taken a long time to establish those things because they work. But what is the meaning of what we're doing, right? And that's a creative realm. That's the realm that we've kind of shucked off. We've said, I don't want to deal with that. Here's my service. Here's my charge. That's what I'm doing. And then I ask people, well, what differentiates you from, your company A? What differentiates you from company B? They're in the same business. Their trucks are green. Your trucks are purple.
Yellow.
What's the difference? You guys charge, for this X amount of dollars, they charge Y. They're probably 15% apart, common for a business depending on markup and all this other stuff. Why should they go with company A or company B? And Joe, I have people telling me, I don't know. They say, I don't know. I mean, well, it's a race to the bottom there. It's always, a margin thing. And I say, no, you're going way too far beyond the meaning of what it is that you do. In that meaning, that's the creativity that will give you not only market differentiation, but like a real sense of what it is that you can uncover. And what it really is about the approach to, cutting the drywall and putting the blowers in and all that stuff, and a redefinition of how it is that you do what you do. Because if you have purpose and you have creativity, you look at yourself as a myriad of things. I can't tell you because it's going to be different for everybody. I did a talk at a convention last year, and I had a gentleman in the restoration business, the disaster restoration business. He had a franchise from one of the popular ones, Joe, and he was like, Nir, I sat through your lecture. It was great. It was an hour. I'm totally inspired. I said, okay, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. And he said, you know what? But like, I'm sorry. Like, people's things flood. I do fires. The kitchen, caught fire, but the rest of the house didn't. It's a nightmare. And I come in and I charge him, blah, blah, blah. He's like, I can't use your creativity stuff. It's fantastic, but I can't use it. What does it mean to me? And I said, okay, what's your background and stuff like that? He's like, what does that have to do with my business? I said, let's talk a little bit about your background. He said, okay, I came up through this, and I had a business, then sold it, then had this other business, stuff like that. I said, well, let's go back to your character and to who you are. He said, okay. I said, what would your friends say about you? And he said, Joe, I'm kind of the neighborhood guy that everybody comes to when they need something. Like what? So he said, like you need to borrow a tool. I've got the tool. I've got a garage full of tools. People come. I was like, I know. I have a guy like that in my neighborhood. We love him. Everyone loves him. He's like, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I guess I'm well liked. I said, yeah, and he said, I'm kind of the guy who when somebody has a problem or an issue, I'm able to come in and help them out with it. I'm like, wow, looks like that's your business too. And he was like, well, I guess I really never thought of it that way, but yeah, it fits. I told this gentleman that there is no coincidence in the fact that he's doing disaster restoration. No coincidence that he's in this business. He didn't fall into it. Nobody falls into anything, Joe. You are literally a product of the creative core that you have in you that has guided you through life, trying to get out and do its thing, but you've kind of squashed it with the analytics. So here you are, the owner of this business. I said, go into work tomorrow, and when your next client calls up, use the identity of who you are, the root of why you are in this business, to sort of help that customer move forward. And he was able to, say, oh, this is great. I had a few phone calls with him, did some consulting or whatnot, follow up. And he told me now that he goes out to a business, it's a whole different approach. I said, wow, I can't wait to find out. What are you doing that's different? He's like, totally creative. I said, great, what happened? He's like, I added a new tagline to my website that said, help is on the way, and I changed my business card. I'm like, dude, that's great. But that's like a baby step of creativity. What else have you done? He's like, okay, so we did a little bit there. And now when I approach a client, I tell him, listen, I empathize with them. I tell them I've seen this many, many times. These are the 5 things that I think will happen. These are the few things that won't. And in the quote, I enabled them the ability to kind of come up with, maybe a more a la carte plan. And I'm like, dude, that's brilliant. Now we're talking about creativity. Why would your customers go a la carte instead of you giving them one price for the job? He's like, it's a business, it's a church, it's something like that. And, they're trying to save money. And I found that by doing that, and this is several conversations later, he said that by doing kind of an a la carte pricing, he found that people would end up maybe taking 1 or 2 of his projects on and not kind of going for the full package. Getting familiar with the staff and the people on the ground, which is essential. They're carriers of your brand. They are the front line, how they interact with customers, what they say, what they don't say, how they act, everything is critical. What he's found is that by offering these a la carte packages, he's actually making more money, because once he gets familiar with the customer, they tend to want to do some more things or allow him to kind of complete the job. So I think in that way, creativity is essential in all that we do, and especially for us here in the business community.
I think that's a good point, because a lot of our listeners are in the indoor air quality consulting or in the disaster restoration world, and when you get a project, you kind of focus on what it is they called you for, and maybe don't show them the a la carte of other things that you can provide for them down the road. So I think that's a good example for our listeners.
Yeah, that's like the tip of the iceberg, right? You look at being creative. It's not about drawing a great picture or playing trumpet, or fine art or dance, which those things are wonderful. They're a very, very tiny sub-component of creativity. They just happen to be the one that we're most familiar with. But there's a whole other piece, of the pie out there that, is creativity. Some of it's innovation. Some of it's coming out with, amazing, different and new and fresh business plans for people to be able to consume. I think that sometimes in different fields, we tend to get kind of stuck in the same way of doing things. And, we kind of fool ourselves maybe a little bit into believing that, it's always been done this way. So why would I change it? And, my message to that person in that career or that business is now is the time, especially when the prevailing wind is, it ain't broke, so why fix it? That is the best time for creativity to come on board and offer you different solutions, competitive advantages, and all kinds of other things that will help you stand out.
Before we break for halftime, I want to ask you about on your website. You said you had a Clio award and an Emmy nomination. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I ended up sort of running advertising agencies for a while, and when I was in school, I used some of the principles that we're talking about today, and I saw that some of the commercials out there on TV were just kind of true and tried, right? Almost generic in their approach, and kind of formulaic. You have a few seconds of this, and you show the product, and then you sort of wrap it up with some text at the end and maybe a phone number, right? So I said, you know what? Why don't we get creative and try to understand a commercial differently? So I was in school at the time, or had just graduated. I can't remember. And I got a couple of friends together, and we made a commercial for a Honda, like a Honda Civic, the car. And it basically it resonated against the truth that Hondas don't break. I've had plenty of Hondas in my lifetime. I'm sure the listeners have had them, and you kind of have to work pretty hard to break Hondas. Motors are good, transmission's good, and they weren't putting it out there that these are unbreakable cars for whatever reason. So I made a little commercial where I got a friend of mine who's kind of a comedic actor, and we did a commercial where he drives around and the Honda's got 200,000 miles, and he's talking about how nothing breaks, and then he pulls down the visor clasp and it breaks in his hand, and he was like, "This is the first thing ever to break on this car," and we submitted it to award shows and this and that, and it ended up winning a Clio, and it got nominated for an Emmy. I didn't win the Emmy, but I got nominated for it. And then I was like, okay, maybe I'm onto something. So, again, we talk about it. I talk about it in the book. But there's ways to look at things when everyone else has looked at it in one way. There's ways to look at things in a different and fresh way, no matter what you do, no matter what business you're in, that can create some incredible value.
All right. Well, let's stop and thank our sponsors here at halftime. When we come back, we'll talk a little more about creativity with Nir Bashan.
IAQ radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus Engineers and Manufacturers of feature-rich particle counters and air quality monitoring instrumentation. Learn more at particlesplus.com. Count on us. Healthy Indoors Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions available at healthyindoors.com. And AEML Laboratories, free FedEx shipping, great pricing, same-day results, and never a rush fee. Learn more at AEMLinc.com. Association sponsors are the Indoor Air Quality Association, a multidisciplinary organization dedicated to promoting the exchange of indoor environmental information through education and research. Learn more at IAQA.org. And RIA, the Restoration Industry Association, the granddaddy of the restoration industry. Network with leaders. Learn more at restorationindustry.org. CIRI, the Cleaning Industry Research Institute. See more deeply through science and research. Learn more at ciriscience.org. That's CIRI science.org. ACGIH, advancing the careers of professionals working in the environmental health, industrial hygiene, and safety communities. Interested in defining their science at acgih.org.
All right, we're back. And by the way, I want to mention our newest sponsor, the American Industrial Hygiene Association. Learn more at AIAJ.org. Their virtual conference starts on Monday, so you're not too late to get in there. We're back with the second half. Nir, I want to, my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick, wrote this question. He said he has a theory that many business advisory books are like New Year's weight loss resolutions. People with good intentions buy them, gym memberships, personal improvement, business books, and they never find out whether the concepts and promises and programs really work, so they don't implement them. As an author and trainer, how can that be overcome? You get an idea and you never really put it into implementation.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think that I think that that's true. I can't really comment for some of the other fields. The health field and different types of things. But I think that most books written about business are written by people who are in academia, which is a wonderful thing because there's lots of research and incredible things going on there. I've just found very few business titles written by people who are in the business. I think I know why, Joe, because the work is unbelievably difficult. If you ever think that you might want to write a book, just call me first, and we'll have a good little chat about it, because it's an incredibly difficult process. And I think what you see is people writing books that are from an academic perspective, and I think that we need more people who are in leadership positions in the private sector to write down their thoughts and their approach. And I think you're starting to see it. There's some really great stuff out there that's coming out later this year. I wouldn't know if I wasn't publishing a book. I get kind of a list of what else is being pushed out by publishers, and there looks like some really good things. So I'm hoping there's sort of a renaissance of books written by people who are in the business. But you have a lot of academics and stuff like that publishing research, which is wonderful. Again, but it doesn't get down to the heart of what you need to do now, today, tomorrow, to improve the business.
So how do we motivate ourselves to go ahead and implement? You get these great ideas, but then you get caught up in the everyday of putting out proposals, going out and looking at jobs. So how do you get people to kind of implement those creative ideas they have?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that so I think you got to make a commitment to envisioning the world in a different way, and especially for my sort of a platform and what I talk about, it's really about seeing the world as it can be and not what it is. And that's going to mean a million different things to a million different people. You might be somebody who is just enamored with innovation. You want the latest gadget, the latest humidity, reduction in the business, and you want to implement that as quickly as possible for your customer. You may be a person that wants to grow. Every motivation is different. You might want to, make more money, or, improve customer service, or you may want to, expand and franchise, or whatever it is that you want to do. I think it's very important to look at what it is that somebody wants to do in relation to why they are not doing it. So if you are somebody that has a bunch of really good ideas and are not implementing it, then my thought is that perhaps the reward for the implementation isn't high enough to what it needs to be. So let's say if you have a really great idea about, technology, let's use that example, and sort of taking out some new products that have come out on the market in this particular business, yet you're not fully motivated in terms of wanting that reward back. Whatever it is, it could be recognition in the business, it could be more consulting work, it could be more money, whatever it is. We're led to believe a lot of times, Joe, that people are only motivated by money, but that could be, there's nothing further from the truth than that. That's one element of what people go out and do their work and perform their services for. So I think by looking at the core of who you are as a creative person, and applying that to the field, you'll then start to recognize what works for you. And what works for you might not be, all about money. It might not be all about this or that. It might be that, what you really want to do is have the business run, sustainably and for a long period of time with little ups and little downs. And that will help motivate what ideas you end up executing or not. I get, when I'm out doing this work, I get a lot of people asking me, Nir, I come up with a bunch of ideas. It's not a lack of ideas. It's an overabundance of ideas. I have like 1,000 good ideas. And then I ask them, well, what are they? They're like, well, we're going to do this, and the other thing. And those are my ideas. And I don't act on them because, I'm too busy or I got other things to do. And I start to question, when I hear that, whether or not people are really viewing their role or their career or their business in terms of its creative essence, like we talked about a little bit earlier. And then I sort of wonder if there is no real guiding light, sort of a North Star to navigate through in a career. You have a lot of people telling you, oh, I've got a lot of ideas that I don't execute, often because they're kind of unmoored, adrift in the sea. I'm in the restoration business. That's kind of what I do. Okay, well, why? I just kind of fell into it. It's like those types of things, when you really look at them closely and you start to examine why it is that we're doing these things that we're doing, there's no coincidences here. There's a clear path that had led to it, even if the path doesn't look clear. So I think coming up with an idea is, relatively straightforward. Coming up with an idea that works for you, that has meaning for you, is really what you should drive toward. And if you do come up with ideas that have some very concrete and deep meaning to you, then you are in a way better position for success. I talk a little bit about that in the book, about how, creativity can really be broken down into three sort of framework topics. And, what we end up doing is rushing toward execution, Joe. We want to buy that machine and go out and use it. We want to do A, B, C, and D and go out and just kind of get it done. But the why factor of why we're doing those things has not been asked. And the how we're going to do it hasn't been visited either. It's just because it's cool, or because I want to, or I think I can make more money. And without having a framework of really understanding who we are and why we're doing this particular business, I think we end up getting stuck.
So it sounds like a lot of what you're telling me is that people need to focus more on their own motivations for doing things, and then that will help them be more creative, I guess, because the next question was, how can the non-creative retrain themselves to think creatively? Do you have any techniques or tools for that?
Yeah, so I think that we're a little bit out of touch with who we are as creative people. I think, when we were children, we were encouraged and we played and we built, wonderful sort of castles out of cardboard or whatever we had around. And these things were wonderful. Now we've gotten older and we're kind of like, whatever, I have real deadlines and I have real things that I need to accomplish. One of the things that I think that you can start doing today to sort of be more creative is to stop and ask yourself why it is that you're doing what you're doing before a particular job or a particular call or a particular quote. I think we've gotten so comfortable in the rhythm of the analytical where we can, kind of just get out the proposal. Why? Because it needs to get out, because we need to make money and stuff like that. Well, what is this proposal really about? Who's it going out to? What are those people's needs? I think one of the most important things that we can do today is sort of stop and ask ourselves, okay, why are we doing this? And then I think what's really, really important is to have a bit of empathy in terms of what our customers want. I can't tell you how many businesses I've seen, Joe, that are like, they almost perform services, and some of them even have products, irregardless to what the customer thinks. They're like, somebody needs to consume my services, and that's why I'm in business. But I argue that those things are a road to sustaining, maybe in the near term. Maybe you can get a couple years thinking like that. But if you don't have empathy for what your customers are doing, what they're going through, and how they're sort of, in need, then I think that you cut yourself off from an auxiliary service, or a completely untapped sort of offering that you can offer a client to help them with whatever particular situation they're going through. So one, I would recommend just stopping for a minute and asking yourself, why am I doing this? And, how did it get this way, right? Is it this way because it's always been this way? Well, that's not a good answer. I mean, it isn't. It's a good answer if you're really in the business of staying in business for a couple of years, just want to ride out the bad COVID times, and that sort of thing, then yeah, that's a fine answer. But if you're looking to grow, you're looking to mature the business, you're looking to, reach a new level of your career and sort of keep rising up, then I think the first thing you need to do is stop and look at why you're doing what you're doing. And then two, you need to relate to the paying customer. There's a relationship there between you and the service that you provide, and the payment made between that customer and you. And I feel like there's a almost, religious, I would say, for lack of a better word, relationship between a customer that brings you on for something and your ability to execute that job. I've seen it time and time again where a vendor or a business offers a relationship and builds a type of relationship that allows the customer to feel good about what they're buying. And I've seen time and time again, those businesses tend to grow. They tend to grow because customers will, call for something else. They'll recommend you to someone else. They'll, there's a whole host of things that somebody will enable you to do when they feel that relationship is a bit sacred. But what do we see, Joe? I don't know about your business, but in a lot of the businesses that I see a lot of kind of, burn and churn. Get that customer in, do the job, move on to the next one. And for me, stopping, saying, okay, time out. Let's look at why we're doing that. Let's look at different opportunities. Let's look at different risks and develop a relationship with that customer that will enable them to either, sort of build with you. I think it's critical. And it's amazing. It seems fundamental, but it's often ignored. Why? I think the analytics tell us burn and churn works. And it does in the short term. If you get a bunch of customers in there, they're paying, you got to do a job and you're moving on. But I argue that doing that and doing a job and just moving on loses all kinds of creative potential for a myriad of things to happen. I can, go back into history even and talk about the Toll House cookie, right? You think, chocolate chip cookies have been around forever. They have not. They were invented by somebody by mistake. What ended up happening was a woman who ran a bed and breakfast in Toll House, Massachusetts, ran out of some ingredient one day and substituted, a chopped up bar of chocolate instead of that ingredient. And, she put it out there, and it was the best cookie that these people have ever had. She was in the business of, the bed and breakfast business. She wasn't in the cookie business or the food business, but a problem that happened in a particular field, which was I ran out of cookies for my guests, ingredients to make cookies for my guests, led her to amazing potential, creative potential with something else. So I argue that if we take our time and we stop a little bit and we ask ourselves some empathetical questions, we have empathy with our client, what could we uncover, Joe, when we see what those clients' needs really are, and how can we service them in a way that is honorable and straightforward to create that relationship that'll lead to more business, new business, and it might lead to something completely unplanned for, which was in this case a cookie that was developed that was a million times more profitable than having a bed and breakfast with 3 rooms. We're too busy racing. I got to get this invoice out. I got to do this. Oh, I got to call the customer because they're complaining. Why are we calling customers when they're complaining? We should call them when they're not complaining. Again, look at creativity and look at problems in a different way, and you will realize growth and profits and sort of even meaning beyond your wildest imagination. You just got to look at it differently.
One of our group I used to work with a lot, they do strategies for success, and they talk about making your customers into cheerleaders for your business. And it sounds like that's what you're talking about to some degree, but you're also talking about listening to your customers. And I wonder if you can maybe comment on why listening is so important.
Yeah. So, listening is, I have a chapter about it in the book, and we went back and forth with the publisher because the first title was Shut Your Pie Hole or something like that. They're like, yeah, we're not publishing that. I said, okay, let's change. I can't remember, but we changed it a few different times. Basically, we have a biological sort of impetus to be understood by others, and it manifests itself by kind of talking too much. And we spend so much of our time talking and not listening. It's a very fundamental thing. We can get into the theory of it and the research and all that, but for me, I run a successful business. What I want to know is, how do I use that today, right? I'm getting off this podcast. I have a bunch of calls to make. I have a customer. How do I start listening? Well, one is you stop talking and you say, hey, what do you think of this, and how did this go? And getting that feedback from the customer is literally gold. It is like putting money in your bank account, Joe, but we have so many people who are so busy trying to express themselves or sort of validate themselves that they won't let a customer listen. My favorite technique, and it's something that you guys can do, right after this podcast, is get on the phone with a client or in person, doesn't matter, and just ask them 4 very, very simple words. You go, what do you think? Right? You say, hey, the service, blah, 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 or, did this go, how did it go, and all this stuff. And then you say, well, what do you think? And that'll open up an environment where somebody will tell you what they think. It might be good. It might be bad. It might give you amazing knowledge that you haven't had before. I think that the amount of information that can be gained by not talking and listening is incredible, and it's free, which is, I love it. Everything in my book, that in the Creator Mindset book, and I hope you all pick up a copy. I think it's a pretty. I'm very into it. It's been like a 7-year process of writing on nights and weekends, and where I had some free time between flying to see a customer, doing that sort of thing. And none of the tools in there cost a penny. This is what I love, right? Because I get that too. Like, Nir, I need to buy expensive equipment in order to be creative. Like, no, you don't. You just need to listen to your customers and let them talk and let them go, you know what? Your guys did a really good job when they came and did this restorative sort of thing, or, the new HVAC system is, great, but A, B, and C are missing, or, A, B, and C worked really well. And what you learn by listening far outbalances anything that you can gain by talking. I don't know, Joe, did that kind of answer?
Oh, absolutely. We're getting a little low on time. I want to go to
Okay.
this next question because I think it kind of gets to the essence of what you're talking about and our situation right now. And that is, we're in a tough situation. So how does the creator mindset handle crisis? Why is vulnerability your first step in crisis management?
So again, we write about this a little bit in the book, the royal we, the editorial, like me. Anyway, I write about it in the book. I write about the Tylenol crisis that happened in '82. I don't know if you remember that. A
Sure.
lot of people don't. And even the folks at McGraw-Hill didn't. Some of them are really young, and they weren't born. They weren't around at that time. Crisis is an opportunity for growth and for innovation. There's no doubt. COVID is no different. The Tylenol crisis of '82 is no different. Basically, some wacko terrorist put cyanide in Tylenol pills because at the time you could open any pill and put whatever you wanted in there. The standards weren't there. They were invented as a result of this very crisis. And the way that that Johnson & Johnson, the maker of Tylenol, responded to the crisis became kind of a textbook way of dealing with crisis. And a lot have been written about it, Joe, from an academic standpoint, which is brilliant. But I write about it from a cold, hard facts of what you could do today if something goes wrong. And the first step is to be vulnerable. A lot of us think that we need to have all the answers when something goes wrong, right? A customer calls and complains and, we better have all the answers. We better tell them, this is what happened and blah, 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 and, the whole deal. But if we're vulnerable and we allow ourselves to sort of, go to a realm where, hey, we might not know the answers. Again, these are all creative principles. Then what ends up happening is a very, very interesting thing. And this was proven in the Tylenol crisis and many crises thereafter. When you're able to be vulnerable with a customer or somebody who has been somehow, in a crisis situation, you're able to relate to them better. And what ends up happening is you're able to sort of tell them, hey, I don't know why it went wrong. I might have to research this and look into it. I might have to, call one of the sub vendors and figure it out. We might have to look at what happened during, some records of the construction project or whatever it is that you're working on. But just saying that fact and admitting that maybe you don't know and being vulnerable will lead to some incredible result. The guy that Tylenol, I think it was James Burke, the CEO at the time, literally went on TV and said, we don't know what's going on, but we're looking into it. And we're shutting down the plants and we're doing everything in our power to figure this out, but I don't know what's going on. And, generally you would think from an analytical perspective that would cause mass chaos, right? Everybody would run around, the sky is falling and, whipping themselves in a circle like, the Black Plague. But what ended up happening was people were like, okay, cool, they're on my side. The guy is literally doing all he can do. And he told us so. And yeah, let's see what happens. And people were glued to their TV. They set up a 1-800 line, which today's a little bit old, but they were able to keep constant contact with customers. They would call and say, have you got any latest information? No, we don't. And then when things started coming in, they started getting the information out. Vulnerability is such an overlooked business tool. It can be used in so many different ways, but especially in crisis.
Great. That's very interesting. It's a good way to illustrate it too. That Tylenol thing was and it, like you said, it led to many changes in packaging and so on, and distribution and so forth. So we're right on about 1 o'clock, but before we go, I'd like to ask, is there anything you'd like to add? Anything we missed? Any final thoughts for our listeners?
No final thoughts. It's been a real pleasure, Joe. The questions have been great. I love this stuff. If you guys want some further information, I'd be happy to give it to you. The book website is thecreatormindset.com, all one word, thecreatormindset.com. And there's a link there. You can go back to my site, which is my name, nirbashan.com. It's been an absolute pleasure. I think the work that y'all do is very special. Sometimes, I'm talking to people in the manufacturing business and they're trying to find meaning in their work, but y'all have a direct connection between what it is that you do and the benefit that people get from it. And your industry in particular is ripe for creative implementation and creative thought. And I'm so glad to be a guest on your show today. And I really appreciate your time and Jonathan, and I'm sad that I missed your co-host, but maybe you'll have me on again.
Well, Cliff will definitely be in touch too. He's going to write the blog and send it to you for your review. And I want to thank you, Nir Bashan, for joining us today. Very interesting, a little different approach on things this week. One of our better business shows. We appreciate you joining us and look forward to talking again in the future. And hopefully the keynote presentations will pick back up and, the conferences will start again and all that. But I'm sure you're going to be busy helping businesses try and work their way through this situation we're in right now. All right, so this is Radio Joe Hughes saying thanks to this week's guest, Nir Bashan. I also want to thank my co-host, the ZMan Cliffs. He'll be back next Friday. At the controls, John, you got to have faith. Most importantly, our growing group of loyal listeners. We got a big show next Friday at noon. We've got the IICRC and RIA show. We got Kevin Pearson coming on, and I believe Mark Springer's coming on as well, and they're going to talk to us about some of the, it's really nice to see groups starting to get along and work together, or something that we here at the show and others in the industry have really pushed for many years. And there's actually been some real great progress in that area over the last 6 months to a year. And we're going to talk about that next Friday at noon when the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.